Personally, it's my grandparents are from Poland, but I had absolutely no idea. Growing up, of course, I knew about it, but I absolutely had no vision, no relation, zero imagination of Poland, of the place where my grandparents came from. Two of them came from very small towns. One came from Białystok. In my imagination, I thought Białystok is the really beautiful big city, and I recently visited, was very disappointed. Israel managed to cut very strongly the relationship with the history, like this idea of being an Israeli and remove the culture, like the Yiddish culture, is like a big no-no. It's like only now there is a kind of renaissance of the Yiddish culture interest. So it's like a huge crack, actually, that one has to slowly fill in with, and to understand how to relate to it, and then also to think how further you can go with such an idea of a return. Is it? Now I'm in the process actually in trying to understand if there could be maybe a real movement of a return. And the next step of the trilogy is actually a congress. The first congress of the movement will take place in Berlin in 2012. I mean, actually this year, in May 2012, in a theater in Berlin, inviting many speakers to speak about what is a Jew, what is Poland, what is Europe, how these two are dependent on each other or need each other. I was invited by a Polish curator to come to Poland and possibly create a new work there. And my interest to go there because, of course, the direct relation between Poland and Israel that I thought is very much related to the way I think of politics, about identity. And I wanted to find out what could be possibly link the two nations, what kind of work could possibly link and evoke a discussion and a dialogue. And so I accepted the invitation in 2006, and I came to Poland and to start my research. And my departure point was actually to find out what is the responsibility of Europe, and specifically Poland, in the creation of Israel. And then how can Israelis overcome the national trauma with Poland? So we still exist in this. It's Poland for many years was and still is a kind of no-no land. That even people that never been to Poland, they would say, my leg will never step on this land. While at the same time, people would go easily to Germany. And that creates a very interesting, it's a phenomenon, why people travel so easily to Germany but not to Poland. I would like to arrive to Poland as if history did not exist, or knowing that it existed, but I would like to find a new way to actually come to Poland and say, okay, let's start. This is like the 0 point, and from now on I would like to imagine something different. And I traveled in Poland for several weeks and went to cities where a Jewish community used to be, and the void was very, very effective. Even I didn't go to concentration camps. I decided that I don't want to visit, but I thought I would like to go to cities where I knew there was a large Jewish community. And it was really a very, very emotional, powerful, even stronger than watching the real atrocities. To feel the void was very, very strong. And through that I came to the idea to imagine actually a renaissance of a Jewish renaissance in Poland. And that was a kind of, let's say, maybe naive, maybe kind of optimistic way of thinking about the future, but at the same time this can maybe a new way to discuss history and waking up the ghost of history and provoke new discourse. One of the most important things was that I should find a collaborator for such a project, because it was important that somebody from Poland should join a project like that, because it was very important that to have a Polish collaborator for such a project, because I could how do you say, expect or the kind of heaviness of such project, or that it can be, it's very charged. One of my missions while being in Poland was actually to start to look for a person that, or people that would like to join such an idea. Sławomir Sierakowski, and he's a young man, he was back then 26, a visionary man with that for himself, his mission was actually to change Poland and to actually create a new left in Poland. And the idea of changing Poland into a heterogeneous society was one of his ideas. And then when I came with the idea that I would like to invite Jews back to Poland to make a renaissance, then for him, of course, it fitted his political view that in order to move on, Poland should really change, because it's extremely homogeneous Poland. More than 98% is Catholic, Polish Catholic. And we immediately came with the slogan, 3.3 million Jews can change the life of 40 million Poles. And 3.3 million Jews is a number of the Jewish community in Poland until the Second World War. Having that in mind, I immediately thought he should be actually the protagonist of the film, and I asked him to write the text of the film, because I wanted a very honest voice. I wanted him to say what he actually believed in, and I think that's the power of the text, that he actually writes what he believes in. He wrote it together with another very important left activist writer, Kinga Dunin. So I think they came together with this fantastic text that is emotionally and very clever and very sophisticated, very simple, but at the same time quite sophisticated. So that's how I came actually to work with Sławomir. The stadium is actually from 1955, and it was built to commemorate 10 years of the Communist Party. Later on in the 80s, late 80s, it became the largest market for Vietnamese who migrated from Vietnam to Poland during the communist era. And it became run down and kind of unused. For me, it's of course very symbolic. It's like the emptiness, the void. That helps a lot to provoke the imagination, like the feeling of the void, of his screaming out loud to Jews that are not there. It's actually quite in Poland, in local Polish, it's quite well-known stadium. And after that, it was actually destroyed, and now it's being renovated for the game, for the 2040. So it was actually, we were filming this work in the very end of this stadium. It's like the life of the stadium was ending actually, and now it's a whole different modern architecture.
Odmieni się oblicze Europy, odmieni się oblicze świata i wy staniecie się inni. Wracajcie nie jako cienie przeszłości, ale nadzieja na przyszłość. Witamy!
Can I provide something that actually goes against exclusion and actually invite the other to return and live together, something very optimistic. It's like a proposal to think if we can actually, the possibilities or maybe impossibilities, I don't know, of living together. And that's maybe in general the kind of umbrella of the entire trilogy, is this kind of touching this, human condition, can we actually manage to live together? it's a question mark. I don't know if probably I don't really give an answer. Of course, the other side of such a call, 3.3 million Jews to return to Poland, it is very much on the content level undermine the Zionist movement, the national, our national, the place of the Jews is in Israel, and it's very much challenging the national identity. What does it actually mean if suddenly 3.3 million Jews will leave Israel and move to Poland? Does it create space for Palestinians to return? So it really bring to the focus also the Palestinian right of return to Palestine. So it's like a big mirror that reflects into the two realities of the European reality and that currently dealing with the migration, xenophobia, etc., and at the same time the Middle East and the kind of ongoing political conflict. So I try to operate the imagination and provoke possibilities. I would say that I chose it was a growing interest I have from several reasons in propaganda films and the aesthetics of propaganda films and the ideological films and related that existed in Europe in the let's say from the 20s, 30s, 50s. That influenced also the way of the Zionist movement, created its own propaganda movies to actually focus on the new future coming nation state and this kind of the promised land and the imagery that was extremely beautiful and provocative, not provocative, let's say extremely beautiful, that very seductive, and actually they were very successful in migrating a lot of Jews to Palestine, actually. And that aesthetics was very much important for me when I talk about utopian ideas, because all those films are very utopian. And when I talk about utopian idea, I wanted to kind of, through also the language, the artistic language, I wanted to kind of make it quite clear, the relationship. It's very tricky especially, let's say, for people from Germany, from the GDR, who experienced the GDR, to see people in uniform is very repulsing. I don't want to be associated to any movement. I don't want to unify. In Russia, when I showed this film, in Russia, there was a very strong reaction to how I dare to deal with such a Stalinist visuals. There was the great fear of the use of it's not even fear, like anger. Let's say anger. It was very emotional. Russian people cannot stand the film because of the Stalinistic. But for me, it's like I, as an Israeli, I have also this, the background of the socialist idea of how to create the state of Israel. So this kind of utopian ideas about living together and the kind of dystopia, that everything has been privatized, and it's one of the elements in the film also. And also by simply killing the leader, it can open new visions to the movement, so that we don't have this one leader that actually will shape our minds, but we can be maybe think together what would be our next step as a movement. But what is very also important for the entire trilogy is that the thin line between fiction and reality, and I try to achieve that through choosing people that are real, meaning that Sławomir Sierakowski is an activist. He's not an actor. He wrote his own text. His speech is his words. The same goes for in the last film, like the people who deliver the speeches, the eulogies. Actually, in most cases, there is the widow. It's a fiction, but in her speech, she refers into historical moment in Poland in 1922 where the president of Poland was assassinated. And some of her words actually are words of the granddaughter of Rabin, who was assassinated in 1995. So I wanted to stress also this idea of progressive thinkers are being assassinated. Rabin had a dream of peace, at least that's the myth, or today he was assassinated. And you have more examples, like Kennedy, Gandhi, Lincoln. It's of course this whole trilogy provoked the question of homeland and sense of belonging. And many of the pioneer Jews who established the state of Israel comes from Poland. Ben Gurion. And this also, it's very interesting that a lot of young people now try to, get a second passport. If I want to talk about very universal questions, or the question of nations, let's say transnationalism, like we are experiencing in Europe. Who are these Europeans that living today? It's a lot of immigrants. It's like a whole different identity of the European identity. In fact, today the Islamophobia is like stronger than anti-Semitism. Who is actually replacing the Jews? That's also a question. It was very important for me to actually start with some very specific history, very specific moment in time, in order to kind of open it up to make it more universal. Nations are fiction. I think this is something agreed already some times ago. Like Benedict was saying, imaginary communities, when he talks about nations. It's like almost like I see that there is a need to understand in my works if somebody can go beyond nation. This is a question. What is next? Can we cross the border of nation? Can we actually? And I don't know. I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I believe, especially if with transnationalism, that people bring their own nation wherever they go. So is it really possible to cut off your national identity, even if you want? I don't know. I don't have an answer. But it's one of the subjects that I'm very much busy with. The kind of like people are dying for the nations. It's so strong. The sense of community through nation is so strong, and it works. And so the early works were trying to understand the system or the mechanism of the state to actually create a narrative, to create a sense of belief. And I wanted to check or maybe not check, but more reflect on the kind of conformist way of thinking and the sense of a kind of collective, which is so disturbing to me, very disturbing. Especially once you step out of Israel, you realize how much you were suffocated and brainwashed in the system. For example, this idea that no question you have to become a part of the military. Like at the age of the 18, so one of the early works was about a woman in the target shooting situation and her way of dealing with this moment, which is very difficult moment for a lot of people, like to hold a gun, and at the same time maybe for other people it's easy, but at least for me it was a difficult moment. This moment of you have power, but you can kill, but complicated also for me. And then later on, the kind of the Soldiers' Memorial Day. Again, it's like a moment of silence that happens the day before the Independence Day, and everybody has to stand for 1 minute of silence to commemorate the soldiers who were killed for the state of Israel. it's a very strong moment, no doubt, but it's also, for me, it was always so manipulative. This moment I have to be sad. I'm being manipulated. If somebody tells me I have to be now, you know. And but it's also very unique that the whole state stands still for. And so this kind of, it creates sort of ambiguity, and I think you can, maybe if you have to have a line, maybe all the films are quite ambiguous. I never tell what is, you know, wrong or right, but I try to provoke personal emotions. The music and soundtrack plays a very important role in making the films. Music in general provokes a lot of emotions, and that helps very much to the image to actually get a different time and different space. The kind of something that surrounds you, something that your body is surrounded by this music and the atmosphere, and that it provokes very different emotion than the image. And sometimes it's a counterpoint to the image, and sometimes it complements. But it's, generally speaking, it's a whole dimension that is not there in the image, but actually in the imagination or in the kind of more in the feelings. And I work with, for the last 10 years, I work with the same sound designer, Daniel Meyer, who is extremely talented, and we work very, very closely on the process of editing the film and editing the music. So we are in a constant dialogue.
I can be found everywhere.
I can be found everywhere.
In Stockholm, in Berlin,
I'm the ghost of return.
in Buenos Aires,
The return,
on Beverly Hills
returning to
Boulevard.
herself. Sunken in the crypt of grief that cannot be expressed in words, my dead tongue hides something that was buried alive.
And what is the place of the ghost? How they play a role in our life? Ghost of history, and therefore for me was to kind of to try to create the character from Rivka, even though it can be super kitsch. It could have the tendency of maybe being kitsch and something that we don't want to deal with that. But I always feel it's always there. This kind of ghost of history, and how can we deal with them and let them be, and be conscious of them. She's an angel of history, and she's always there. She's the end of the trilogy, actually. Yeah. And we should not manipulate them, those ghosts, you know, because they want to escape. Really, this whole trilogy, you can read it as a collective psychotherapy. To free ourselves. Like at least I try to free myself from this, and maybe historical, you know, like historian or scientist would say, okay, there's no way this Jewish community was destroyed in Europe, and there is no way that it will. There is no chance that there will be a renaissance. That Israel is too, you know, like some would say, Europe. No interest. People would go to Australia, people would go to America, but so if it can turn into a resistance movement, you know, resist the politics in Israel, that will be very strong.